Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining Freedom House for our discussion today on the struggle for Pastor Ezra Jin Mingri's freedom in China. My name is Brian Tronick, and I serve as director of the Fred Hyatt program to free political prisoners at Freedom House. For those of you less familiar with our work, Freedom House is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization focused on expanding and defending freedom globally. This year marks the 85th anniversary of our founding by Eleanor Roosevelt and Wendell Willkie, two visionaries who set aside their political differences to mobilize the U.S. public against Nazi Germany and the threat to our collective security and universal values. For decades, Freedom House has sounded the alarm on rising authoritarianism through our research and analysis. We have worked with policymakers across the political spectrum to tackle threats to freedom in the United States and around the world. And we have provided life-saving support to the brave frontline defenders leading the charge for democracy and human rights in some of the most repressive environments in the world. Unfortunately, their work is now more important and more dangerous than ever before. As Freedom House has documented in our flagship report, Freedom in the World, global freedom has declined for 20 consecutive years, and as a result, the human rights defenders on the front lines of the fight against authoritarianism are frequently targeted, imprisoned, or even killed. According to the US State Department, there are approximately 1 million political prisoners throughout the world. These individuals, journalists, human rights defenders, democratic opposition leaders, religious leaders, artists, and ordinary citizens represent the conscience of their societies. Their imprisonment is an assault not only on their freedom, but on the shared principles of human dignity and justice. The Fred Hyatt program, which I lead, pushes back against the global epidemic of political imprisonment and works every day to free these champions of democracy and human rights. Today, we recognize one such leader, Pastor Ezra Jin, who dared to practice and share his faith in one of the most dangerous countries to do so. Pastor Jin founded and led Zion Church, one of China's largest underground house churches, and for this, he was arrested, deprived of contact with his family, and charged with serious crimes. Today marks the 210th day of his detention. Shortly, we will hear a statement from Senator Tim Kaine. You'll then hear insights from our fantastic expert panel. With the time remaining, we'll turn to audience questions. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit any questions you have, and we'll get to as many as we can. I'll now turn it over to Senator Kaine, who we thank for sharing a recorded statement.
Hey everybody, Senator Tim Kaine here. As President Trump gears up to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in May, it's important that the president use that engagement to prioritize important human rights issues. And one is the release of Pastor Ezra Jin and others who've been unjustly imprisoned in China for the simple act of professing their faith. Pastor Ezra, who has family in Virginia, was arbitrarily detained by the PRC in October 2025 alongside other leaders of the Zion Church. He joins many other leaders of religious and ethnic minority groups, Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, Tibetans, Uyghurs across China, who face serious persecution and human rights abuses at the hands of their government. I was proud to join my North Carolina colleague, Senator Ted Budd, in leading a broad and bipartisan and bicameral message to the president on this issue. And I look forward to continuing to work side by side with this broad coalition on behalf of Pastor Ezra and others so that we can support all people who are imprisoned in China for practicing their faith or indeed imprisoned in other ways that would violate basic human rights laws. Thanks to Freedom House for investing your time and resources to speak on this issue and for keeping the cause of Pastor Ezra and others at the forefront of the public's attention as we go into this very important meeting between President Trump and Xi Jinping.
Thank you to Senator Kaine. I'm excited now to introduce the members of our really fantastic panel. First, Grace Drexel is the daughter of Pastor Jin and is currently the advocacy director at the Luke Alliance, which provides pastoral care and global advocacy for the persecuted church. She was previously a national security research analyst on a Senate leadership committee and a professional staff member at the Congressional Executive Commission on China. We have Ambassador Sam Brownback. He is the co-chair of the International Religious Freedom Summit and chairman of the National Committee for Religious Freedom. He has a long and distinguished career in public service, including as the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom in the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives, and as the Governor of Kansas and Secretary of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. His latest book, China's War on Faith, will be coming out in just a few days, and it discusses the CCP's efforts to control and even exterminate various religious groups. A very timely book. Finally, we have Dr. Katrina Lantos Sweat. She is the president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice, which was established in 2008 to continue the legacy of her father, the late Congressman Tom Lantos. She also co-chairs the International Religious Freedom Summit with Ambassador Brownback. She is the former chair and vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and teaches human rights and American foreign policy at Tufts University. She also serves as co-chair of the board of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea and the Budapest-based Tom Lantos Institute. So welcome to this fantastic panel. Really grateful to hear your insights. And again, this event comes exactly a week before President Trump's travel to China. So just a great time to look ahead to next week and talk about Pastor Jin. So Grace, I want to start with you. Your dad's case has garnered just a lot of attention and support. But for those who may not be as familiar, can you talk about who your dad is, what he has been through, and what his current status is?
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you, Ambassador Brownback and Dr. Lantos Flat for being here, and thank you for everyone who is here today also to hear about the story of my father and to support for his release. My father, Pastor Ezra Jin Mingri, he is a pastor in China. He is a pastor of Zion Church, which is one of the largest underground or independent churches in China. And he this church started in a church in Beijing, and it then grew nationwide and became kind of this online offline model. So in October of 2025, the Chinese Communist Party and the leadership decided to crack down on the church and arrested nearly 30 leaders initially, and now 18 of the leaders are still in detention, including my father. They are all held in a prison that we hear has very little that there's no beds and people are sleeping on the floors. They are not well nourished. We are not able to see them or hear from them, the family members. The only ones that are able to communicate with them are through lawyers, and even then, most recently, the lawyers have been targeted, and so we have not even been able to have consistent communications with those that are detained. So it is extremely, extremely troubling, and we as family members are all pleading so that my father and the others would be able to be released, especially um, ahead of the summit.
Thank you. And again, so sorry for everything your family is going through. Ambassador Brownback, your book is coming out, I think, in 5 days, if I'm not mistaken. It's very relevant for this discussion. So let me ask you, how does the arrest, detention, and criminal prosecution of Pastor Jin and the other Zion Church leaders and members fit more broadly into China's attack on religion?
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. And thank you, Freedom House, for hosting this event. And Grace, it's just great to be with you. And every time I see you, I think of the trauma on a family that goes through something like this. And unfortunately, there are literally millions of people in China going through this. So here you're seeing an example of one, and it's a dramatic and it's a terrible example, but it represents millions, and it's Christians and Muslims and Buddhists and Falun Gong because of China's war on faith. They are attacking faith, and it's not China, it's the Chinese Communist Party. I want to make clear that our battle is not with the Chinese people, it's with the Chinese Communist Party, who is atheistic and cannot stand or tolerate any structure, a power structure outside of their own. And thus, when Pastor Jin starts his church and its allegiance is to God and not the government, this is a threat. My co-chair, Dr. Lantos Sweat, uses the line, and I'm going to steal it from her today, but attribute it to her. We look at religious freedom as a fundamental cornerstone human right. The Chinese Communist Party looks at it as an existential threat to their power. And so they are at war with it. They attack it everywhere, and they put people in jail. People disappear. They kill them. They persecute them. All sorts of things that they do to control people of faith. Often the people of faith are the only civil society left in a country of authoritarian nature like China. That's the only structure that's left, and so the communists come at it aggressively. They attack religious leaders. They're usually the first ones attacked, the last ones left standing. And that's why I admire Freedom House for lifting this cause up, because by lifting up religious leaders, they're really lifting up freedom for the entire country in doing this. This is just critical. And what I point out in the book is that this is the glass jaw of communism and authoritarianism is religion. They can't tolerate it. They can't take it. And yet there's this innate human desire and nature within each of us to seek what's beyond us, to seek the divine, however you might express that. And it calls us. And so they know that, and they do everything they can to suppress it. They spend billions of dollars every year. They fear religious freedom more than they fear our aircraft carriers or even our nuclear weapons, because this really goes at their power structure. And we need to fight them on it. I really hope and pray that President Trump raises this case, and I pray that Pastor Ezra Jin will be released after this meeting. One final note, Brian. We saw this happen a lot earlier in China, and under Mao, it was just ruthless on religious people. And then it kind of let up a little bit under Deng Xiaoping. And then when they were coming into the most favored nation status as a country and an open trading partner, they would do this sort of catch and release program of pastors. They would catch them, and then as there was going to be a big vote in Congress, they'd release them to show, oh, we're opening up. Well, they were controlling it all along, and I think really Pastor Jin and a number of the religious leaders recently arrested have been done to create trading material in the upcoming summits. And I pray they get out, but let us not lose sight of the inherent nature of the Chinese Communist Party and their willingness to kill people. They've killed more people than any regime in the history of mankind, to kill people, to control the place so that they stay in power.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Dr. Lantos Sweat, you have a great perspective. You're the former chair and vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. So I wanted to ask you to speak about what tools the U.S. government has at its disposal to pressure China to release Pastor Jin and more generally to stop persecuting religious believers.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. And I too want to begin by thanking Freedom House for putting a focus on this critically important issue. I also want to pay tribute to my two colleagues on this panel. Grace, every time I'm with you, I think how wonderfully named you were by your parents, because you just exude such grace and such loveliness and such dignity in all that you do. And my prayers, and I know the prayers of everyone on this panel, are with your father and with you. And I know that your advocacy for him has been probably the single most powerful tool that has been deployed, if I can use that word, on his behalf. And I just have to say to my dear friend and admired colleague, Ambassador Brownback, that he is totally the hero of the international religious freedom movement. He was, without a doubt, the greatest ambassador at large we ever had for religious freedom and has continued that leadership. So it's quite an honor for me to be on this panel with two people I admire so much. You know, you bring up, of course, a critically important point, and that is, what tools do we have? We already have heard conversation today about the importance and the pressure we need to bring on the Trump administration for Pastor Ezra Jin's case to be raised in the upcoming summit. But there is a whole toolbox of tools that are at the disposal of our government. And the truth is, they are not used as aggressively. They are not used as forcefully. They are not used as consistently as they should. We have, of course, the global Magnitsky sanctions. There are specific sanctions that are included as part of the International Religious Freedom Act. These are things like visa bans, freezing of the assets of individuals who are identified as having engaged in persecution of a specific individual or a targeted community. There are, of course, a number of other diplomatic tools, demarches, public denunciations. You know, they run the gamut, and the old phrase that used to be employed within the human rights community was that we need to name, we need to shame, and we need to blame. And it is about bringing these battles, both on behalf of specific prisoners of conscience, like Pastor Jin, and on sort of the more broad landscape of human rights abuses, bringing it out of the shadows, making sure it's a central part of the discussion, and something that Ambassador Brownback has worked on very hard, that I believe strongly, is that fighting for religious freedom, fighting more generally for human rights, is very much in our national interest. When we do that, we are leading from our strength. We are fighting on our turf when we fight there. And we want to fight always on our strongest turf. And to me, it is the defense of religious freedom. It is the defense of democracy and fundamental human rights. It's the fight that Freedom House has been in now for getting closer to a century than a half century, which is really fantastic. I'm going to say something a little controversial, if I may, because it's an idea I've put out there a few times. And I know some people aren't entirely comfortable with it, but when we talk about targeted sanctions, I would like, and I would encourage this administration to consider targeted tariffs in defense of religious freedom. You know, we know that this is an administration that really appreciates tariffs, that sees there's power in them, economic power and power of a different sort. And, you know, I know a lot of people don't like the idea of bringing that sort of a tool into the religious freedom conversation. But the reason I think it's something we should consider is multifold. On the one hand, money talks. That kind of pressure, that kind of very specific targeted thing gets the attention of the bad actors, of the those who are engaging in these sorts of abuses. I also think that it likewise serves to raise the profile. One of the struggles we have with human rights generally with religious freedom specifically, is coming in from the margins to the center of the conversation. If you were to have targeted tariffs saying this tariff has been imposed because of the persecution of the underground church movement, because of the persecution of the Uyghur Muslims, the Tibetan Buddhists, and we want to see progress there before this painful tariff will be modified or lowered or lifted. I think it could become another tool. And so I throw it out there again to your audience, to my colleagues on this call, because I think it's the sort of thing, you know, they say money talks. Well, I would like to have some tougher and more effective talk when it comes to China and its terrible persecution, in particular of heroic religious figures like Pastor Jin and whole communities. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think it's really important to remind people that there are things we can do. People think of China as a, behemoth and what can we really do? Well, it's great to be reminded that there are specific tools that exist already and additional tools that we can come up with. So thank you so much for that reminder. Grace, I'll circle back to you. So again, as I mentioned at the outset, this event is just coming at a really good time. We're 1 week out from the historic summit, President Trump traveling to China. And so as he prepares to travel to China next week to meet with Xi Jinping, Grace, what would be your message to the president as he prepares for that trip?
Yeah, thank you so much. And just again, really feeling so tremendously honored that I'm having this opportunity to share my thoughts about what I hope the president would be able to raise in ahead of his summit. And I know that there are a litany of things that are on the docket that the president and Xi Jinping will be talking about. And like Dr. Lantos said, that human rights and religious freedom often is not the center of big conversations. But as a daughter, I'm extremely just also very worried about my father's health. He has pretty severe type 2 diabetes, and in the past, he's been hospitalized at least twice. Um, and now we hear that he is not allowed the doctor prescribed medication. Again, because we're not able to see him regularly, we don't know how his health is doing at all. And I hear prison is not great for the health either. So just in general, we're really concerned about how his health is deteriorating. And as both leaders also have daughters around my age, yeah, I hope that they can understand kind of the daughter's plight, to ask to see his father again. We we have been missing my father for many years now. He has missed many parts of our lives already as we are in the US, and he's been ex-banned in China for the last 7 years or so, or close to 8 now. He has missed my wedding. He has missed my brother's graduations and my mom's graduations, the birth of my two children, and now that I'm also pregnant and due in 5 weeks, oh my goodness. Um, I really would love for my father to meet my grandchildren, like his grandchildren, in person. And ultimately, I think this would really cement President Trump's legacy, to be like the liberator of hostages, and just show the strength of America, especially the fact that um, ahead of the nation's 250th birthday, um, it will just showcases how the strength of America is and the beauty of this country. I definitely don't think we're entitled for America to help us in any way, but it would just show that America is truly beautiful and strength, like powerful when it stands with the weak and the persecuted. And it will be able to, and again, quoting Tokyoville, like America is good when America is strong when America is good. So just really hoping and praying that this will be um, um, an opportunity for that to be showcased on a global stage as well.
Thank you. I've said it before to Grace herself, and I'll say it again, is Grace, your father is really lucky you are out here and able to speak on his behalf. Having that family advocate in political prisoner cases is really important. And your father is blessed to have you who speak so well and really convey his spirit. And so thank you again for sharing. Um, and Ambassador Brownback, I'll turn back to you. You have called China's war on faith a national security imperative, somewhat shifting the conversation from just the realm of human rights or religious freedom to the national security arena. Can you explain what you mean by this and why it's important to understand Pastor Jin's case and the many other cases in China like it, not only as a human rights issue, but also as a matter that implicates U.S. national security?
Ryan, thanks for the question. And Grace, yeah, you just such a beautiful advocacy and amazing. Uh, Brian and everybody that's on this call, we normally on political prisoner, religious prisoner cases, we're pleading. We're asking, please let this person free. What I'm arguing is that we should do that, but we should turn the thing completely around and use it as an offensive tool and say, this is what the nature of this regime is. They do this to people like Grace Jen Drexel, and they have no problems doing that. What type of character is underneath a regime that does things like this? It's um, it's really flipping and turning the tables. Instead of us pleading, we're using it as a tool of offense and saying this is not a legitimate regime when they treat their own people this way. When they round up pastors by the thousands and just say, okay, this is the way we are. This is what we're going to do. We'll round you up. The pastors there, one of them told me a new term they make disappear into a noun where you're disappeared, where nobody knows where you are. Well, you've been killed. Um, it's a bit like the situation, if I could use this really rough and imperfect analogy, of the Strait of Hormuz right now in Iran, where Iran threatened the Strait of Hormuz, shut it down, and President Trump could be sitting, okay, come on, you got to open it up, got to do something here. This is plugging all this oil up. And he flips the table and uses it offensively. Say, okay, we're going to shut it down. You're not going to do it. We're going to shut it down and put the pressure on China, your big ally, who needs the oil far more than we need it, and other places. That's what we can do with religious freedom as a cornerstone issue. We stand on our principles. There's nothing bigger as a principle of the United States than religious freedom. It was the founding of our country was built upon this. We plead for the case of Pastor Ezra Jin and be released, but we also point out that, look, this is what you do, and this is what China, the second biggest economy in the world, does to people like Jimmy Lai, the publisher. There are 9 Catholic bishops being detained, or we don't know their whereabouts right now. 9. We should plead for all of them and ask, where are they? What's happening to them? And use this as a national security offensive tool, similar to what we use, really, the Jewish refuseniks against the Soviet Union and the evangelicals who were mistreated under the Soviet Union. It delegitimizes the regime, and that's who our problem is with the Chinese Communist Party. And this is how we can use this as a national security issue.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that perspective. And Dr. Lantos Sweat, of course, a lot of the talk now with the summit coming up is what can President Trump do? Can he raise Pastor Jin's case and stand up for religious freedom? But I wanted to ask you what role, other groups and even individuals can play. So, what role can NGOs or academics or religious leaders, or even just, persons of faith throughout the world play in pushing back on China's war on faith?
Well, it's a wonderful question, and I sort of want to elaborate on what Ambassador Brownback just said. We have to more broadly delegitimize the underpinnings of a society that thinks it's appropriate to act in this way. Many years ago, my late father, Congressman Tom Lantos, who was the founder of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, fought a very tough fight, and for a number of years he was successful, but ultimately failed to not allow for permanent normal trade relations with China, because it was sort of an act, if you will, of legitimization. It was saying, yeah, we have different systems, we disagree, but we're just going to put our trade relations on a normal footing. And prior to that time, every year there would be at least one major congressional debate in which the terrible, outrageous abuses of China were put on display and were debated and discussed. And yes, the administration would be able to kind of waive the restrictions on trade because of the nature of the Chinese regime, but at least you had to go through a process. When we shifted, and I'm sorry to say it was during the Clinton administration, to permanent normal trade relations, that opportunity to bring this fundamentally illegitimate character of the regime was kind of taken away. And so I think Ambassador Brumback is 100% on the right track, that we need to once again delegitimize the underlying acceptability of a government, of a system that does this to its own people. I also want to sort of follow in Ambassador Brownback's wake by tying this a little bit to the war now that we are engaged in with Iran. What is the fundamental character of the Iranian regime? That it is a repressive theocracy that allows for zero religious freedom, whether for Muslims or non-Muslims, of its entire society. Religious freedom is the hallmark. It is sort of the marker, the way that you can tell whether a society is fundamentally healthy or fundamentally wrong and corrupt and unhealthy. And we see where it leads. It leads, in fact, to the most serious political threats, economic threats, military threats, national security threats. And so it really is so fundamental. Now, to respond specifically to your question, what can we do beyond pressuring, pleading with the president to raise this? I think, and I sort of want to take a page out of the playbook of one of the great human rights defenders, the very distinguished Canadian Professor Irwin Cotler, former Minister of Justice for Canada, former member of the Canadian Parliament. But he's also been known as Freedom's Counsel because he took on many, many important cases of political prisoners, some of the most famous ones. And he talks about sort of having to utilize the full toolbox of sort of levers that are at our disposal. And so we need to look at legal tools and, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. The UN is kind of off there. They do their own thing. Secretary Rubio said the other day, we kind of need to see how useful they are. But this Working Group on Arbitrary Detention is a venue you can go to. You can bring basically a legal claim there and get a ruling. Does that ruling by itself, result in the release of a prisoner? No, it usually doesn't. But it, begins to build that layer of legitimacy. Nowadays, of course, we have the mechanism, the tool of social media. And I confess right up front, I'm not very good at social media because I'm too old. I have lots of grandchildren. So I'm not the person who knows best how to deploy it. But there are legions of young people out there deploying it for the most shallow of purposes, for the most insignificant and inconsequential of entertainment purposes, whether it's cat videos or the latest dance or how they put on their makeup, all sorts of things. The human rights community, the NGO community writ large, has to, I think, become much more skilled, and this involves recruiting a young generation at deploying this enormously powerful tool for things of consequence. But it's young people who will know how to do it in the sort of exciting ways that draw eyeballs, that raise the profile, and that get people thinking and talking about somebody like Pastor Ezra Jin. And this I think is really important. We of course look at a big event like a summit between Xi Jinping and President Trump. That's Godzilla and, is it King Kong? Is that what the old movies? It's Godzilla and King Kong, sort of. That's the clash of the titans, if you will, or the meeting of the titans. But one of the ways we change the cost-benefit analysis for a government like China's is not letting any representative of the Chinese government come, whether it's a cultural representative or an economic this or a environmental or whatever. We don't let them ever interact, appear, speak in any international arena or in our country or at the UN without having some measure of protest there to make their life a little uncomfortable, a little bit difficult, so that at some point they say, can we just get rid of this Pastor Jin? Let's just let him go because we can't send our people anywhere. We can't turn anywhere without seeing somebody complaining about his imprisonment. And so, that sort of, yes, the big stuff, but also all the little pinprick ways of protesting that get people on the inside in that government to start saying, keeping this guy is costing us more than it's worth. Their cost benefit analysis begins to shift if there's this sort of unrelenting and effective high level, yes, but also medium and lower level advocacy and pressure and protest going on a regular basis.
Thank you so much for that. Um, So I just want to remind those in the audience who are listening in, please, you can start putting questions in the Q&A. I'm going to sort of moderate those and read them and pick and choose which to pose. But please do put some questions in the Q&A. We'll get to that in just 3-4 minutes. Um, in this last little chunk of time where I'm posing my own questions, Grace, I wanted to come back to you. So, I think a lot of people have heard of your dad, that he's been in Senate resolutions, he's been in letters to the president, he's been in the news, which is great. But I think sometimes you're just hearing the basic facts about him. But you're here, and I wanted to give you the chance to tell us a little bit more about who your dad is. Give us a sense for, what he's like. He's a father, he's a pastor, he's a human rights defender daring to preach in China. But can you just give us a better sense of your dad, what he's like, and sort of, what your relationship with him is like?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. Thank you. And oftentimes when we are in this conversation, we um, still forget that, like at the end of the day, he is a person with a family, and we have very real and loving relations with him. He's an extremely kind and loving father, kind of very not stereotypical Asian father, not very stern. I was always more afraid of my mom than my dad growing up. Um, my dad, he rarely criticized us, nor even like, yeah, he was just always so kind and so generous and tries to see the bright side of everyone, including his students, his ministry partners, like, and like us as kids. Um, and we would, he was very humorous and had just a great sense of just general joy and jolliness around him. We would often walk like linked arms. And I actually went to school abroad quite a lot. So my dad would always like quickly introduce me, be like, this is my daughter, not just a random girl linking arms with me. And it's just a very humorous way of of making like just being so like extremely funny. Um, and but he's also extremely studious and serious about his faith. Like to him, Christianity really like changed his life. He was the generation of student during the 1989 Tiananmen Square protest, and so at that time, the whole generation, many of them just completely lost faith in their future. And for him, he found hope and love and just like freedom in Christ. And that's what he consistently shares with the church. And similarly, I think many Christians in China, they don't become Christians because they're political. They become Christians because they have an intimate and a real life-changing relationship with Christ, just like many Christians from across the world. And like our church was also not political. We didn't put ourselves against the regime or against a leadership. In fact, I would say probably the Chinese Communist Party placed itself on the other side without. Like the church was never in a position to didn't put itself as the enemy. But we, I think, also, again, as Christians, felt like if our whole life was changed through our faith in God, like we've already died once, and so um, Christ lives like, and so now we are like slaves to Christ, and He is the only leader in our church, and so that's in some ways the bottom line that many of the Christians in China are holding on to. So again, as I'm advocating and as I am in this situation too, I do pray ultimately for a miracle to happen because it does feel like, especially when dealing with China, that miracles are really what we're asking for right now. So, really grateful for everyone in the chat and everyone in here to be thinking about what other nations can do, what other NGOs can do as well. But I also do hope and pray that for those who have faith or just in general, please think of my father and pray for my father, and pray for the many Christians in China as well. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Grace. Thank you so much. I'm going to now pose some questions to the panel as a whole. I welcome everyone or some of you to answer. I think you all have very, interesting and complementary perspectives. So let me start with this. So, again, as we've discussed in October, nearly 30 Zion Church leaders and members were arrested in what has been called the largest coordinated nationwide crackdown against an unregistered Christian house church network in more than 40 years. So my question for the panel is why now, or why in October anyway, this sudden crackdown of this intensity, and why Zion Church specifically?
Yeah, Brian, if I could just jump in on that, I think you're seeing China play this card just very aggressively right now, and I think it's part of their negotiating strategy. I think it's part of their wolf diplomacy. I think it is a completely flawed and failed strategy. Instead of kind of putting us back on our haunches, it makes us lean into the fight more. This is a nation that stands for religious freedom. It's in our founding. It's more American than apple pie and hot dogs. This is basic for us, and so they're really. And this is a very not an accurate example, but it's like Japan attacking Pearl Harbor in a sense. Instead of them thinking, okay, this is going to weaken the Americans, it just made us mad and really made us fly into this fight that much more. And I think that this is a bad calculation on the part of the CCP and Xi Jinping to do this. It does reveal the nature of the regime at its core. It cannot tolerate any authority outside of the structure of the party. And here they're doing it. Couple real quick points. This is a nation, the only one I've been able to find in the world where you cannot legally name a child Muhammad because of their oppression of Islam. This is a nation where the Dalai Lama, the head of the Tibetan Buddhism, cannot go to his own place in Lhasa. He can't return to that. This is a place that's doing 3 religious-based genocides as we speak against the Muslim Uyghurs, against the Tibetan Buddhists, and a cultural genocide and a direct genocide earlier, and against Falun Gong practitioners. That just wiping them out. This regime is doing this right now, and I think what they're doing, I think they're trying to show they're tough and wolf diplomacy. I think it is a completely flawed strategy and will just make us madder.
I'd like to jump in as well if I could. If I'm not mistaken, and Grace, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Pastor Ezra was charged with illegal use of information networks. And I think that that particular charge underscores another dimension of this repression that Ambassador Brownback is talking about. China is afraid of how you continue to exert this totalitarian control over a population that large when there are, when a church can share sermons online, can hold meetings online. One of the things that at the Lantos Foundation we've been working on for a number of years is the idea of internet freedom as being an essential tool of freedom writ large. In our age, having free access to information is really a critical dimension of religious freedom, of democracy, of human rights. And that's why we have seen now for many, many years China's fear of internet access outside of China, the Great Firewall of China, the fact that they employed and had an army of, tens and tens of thousands of sensors sort of trying to monitor the internet and basically have shut it off. And there are a lot of tools out there that try and circumvent the Great Firewall. But here we see within China this fear of information networks, this fear of the truths of faith, these profound Christian teachings being able to be shared, not just in a little house church in a basement, that people sneak into, but through the power of information networks. And so I think, you know, uh, the Zion Church was growing in part because it was able to effectively use these kinds of information networks to build a community, to share truths, to preach sermons that strengthened and enriched people's lives and gave them hope and gave them a purpose and meaning for their lives. And that is also, I think, a very frightening and terrifying thing. And what makes it really tricky is it's no longer feasible really to function in the modern world without using the internet, information networks, if you want to call it that. And yet we see Iran has completely shut off the internet. So it shows you what they're afraid of. They're afraid of people of faith. They're afraid of the free flow of information. They are afraid of all the things that make a civilization possible. And so yeah, we need to, alongside our fight for religious freedom, we need to do more, and we can do more, to tear down the Great Firewall of China, to make free access to information on the internet available to people who are now living behind digital iron curtains. In the old day, Winston Churchill's wonderful phrase, an iron curtain is descending across Europe. Now it's a digital iron curtain that these societies are attempting to imprison their people behind.
Grace, do you want to jump in? Yeah.
Yes, one more thing, and just I feel like when I had mentioned my father's case to many people before, they sometimes say like, well, Christians have been persecuted in China since I've known that there are Christians in China. Like, what is new here? And in some ways, like I think it is true that I do weep oftentimes thinking that this land is so like hardened towards faith for so long, and there has been tremendous like missionaries and people who had come to China and tried to bring Christianity into China. But like it's also the case like as I was growing up in China, we had thought that like pastors in prison was something of the past. Like Ambassador Brownback said, like that was something of the Cultural Revolution. Like we've not heard of pastors put into prisons in such a large scale. And now it seems like every other week we hear of another pastor or another church being taken down. And there are now apparently hundreds of pastors and other church leaders that are detained, that are in prison, or that have disappeared, and many that we don't even know of that are in smaller like communities, and they are more hidden. And so we in the international community don't even hear about them as much. And that is shocking. In some ways, it's asking like, what is the direction that this nation is going to? And the Christians and the faith community is kind of like a potentially a canary in the coal mine. Like, if that is the case, if that is the direction of this country, like that is extremely scary in some ways as well. And I hope that that is not where the Chinese Communist Party is turning again. And I also hope that if China wants to present itself as a normal country and doing norm to do business and such as it has done, then I hope that they will also not be presenting this image of persecuting religious faith leaders like this.
Thank you all. Maybe one or two more questions before we wrap up. To me, one of the detention of a pastor in and of itself is galling and is terrible and wrong. But one of the really the most audacious and galling things, I think, is that China's not only content to detain Pastor Jin thousands of miles away, but they are reaching their long arm here into the United States to target Grace and her family after they started speaking out. So, Grace, maybe you can start by sharing what has happened since you and your family have started speaking out. Again, these are U.S. citizens here in the United States. What's happened? And then I'd love Dr. Atlanta Sweat and Ambassador Brownback. Can you share? How common is this? Is this happen? And what can be done about it?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I mean, there has been like a flood of harassment online and especially on my husband's accounts, and there's been a lot of phishing and like infiltration digitally and such that we've been dealing with, and that's just very common. But most like harrowing is when my mother received a call from an agent posing as if a federal government um, yeah, from the telecommunications, um, and they basically threatened her and said that she is potentially charged with money laundering, and then connected her directly to a police station in China. And then that police then continued to threaten my mom and said that she had to return to China, and or else she'll be charged with millions